Hello everyone, I'm speaking to you here from my dining room and want to talk to you a little bit about Development 3.2 just to give you some basic ideas about approaching the reading and tying the things together, tying together this development with previous and future developments. So let me first start out. The topic is modernization and global modernization, and I give you a definition of that in Development 3.2, but it's basically the idea that we're seeing more European forms of economics and political units and scientific culture. Now, does that because modernization automatically means European automatically means good, everything else is bad? No, it's not what I'm saying. This is one way we can try to capture what's going on in the world. And the European countries and the United States are the ones that are, quote unquote, modernized first, okay? And that happens for a couple of reasons. So let's think about what's going on before these readings. One, we've got the scientific revolution that we looked at back in Unit 1, and that's going to be obviously important for this kind of development of a different way of looking at the world from the intellectual and religious ways that predominated before roughly 1600, before the 1600s. And so this is going to emphasize empirical reasoning. It's going to emphasize observation. It's going to emphasize the scientific method, experiments, okay, and the idea that the universe can be understood through scientific inquiry. That's really important to the scientific frame of mind. And then technology can be used to solve the problems that, in a sense, nature puts before us, okay? And with more use of technology, more use of science, people can take more and more control of the world, of nature, of the environment, and use it for their own ends, and increase their standard of living. Okay, the most important way in which that's done, and that's built on, to some degree, on this scientific view of the world, is the Industrial Revolution, right? The application of steam power, especially, to, and later electrical power, to the manufacturing of goods, right? And so that's something that we've seen is incredibly important in Unit 2, right? The economic transformation of Great Britain, and then of other countries like Prussia and all of Germany, France. Eventually it's going to spread to places like Russia, Japan, right? And then all around the world in the 20th century and 21st centuries. So this is a big development, right? The growth of industry. And it's, for some, this means, technology really does solve almost all of our problems, or it's a path to solving many of our problems. And those who trust most in that are the kind of intellectual and economic elites of 19th century Europe and 20th century and 21st century. We also have more and more a global economy, right? And this, we can see from the early modern economic growth that was made possible by the it was made possible by the exploration of Europeans around the world, and by colonization and the Columbian exchange, so that you start to have a lot of products produced in the Americas that are sent to Europe for turning into manufactured goods. Also, the trade between Europe and Asia for Chinese and Indian goods, fabrics and spices and things like that. Okay, tea. And as European countries become more powerful, we're going to see more European influence in Asia, in Africa. Okay, and then we also have the nation state. Okay, we talked right before break about nationalism and the nation state. The nation state model is where you have a centralized state that is defined by national identity. Okay, France, Germany, Great Britain, and more that's going to become the standard model too. And so when we look at the countries that define what we think of as modernization, these are the European countries and the United States. And because they're so economically and militarily powerful, they really help to define that for the world in a lot of ways, for better or worse. And so that's kind of the bigger picture of what we're looking at here. And we can see as you read the way that this affects the European countries and the globe. They're the first ones to go through this process of modernization. And so we see this in, say, the Second Industrial Revolution, where the countries that are already industrialized also add steel industries and the fertilizer industry to make their crops grow even more abundantly through the use of industrially produced fertilizer, other types of food production in big-time factories. We see electrical plants and we see chemical plants. The Second Industrial Revolution is a heavier kind of industry, develops on top of what's already there. We see this in industrialized militaries. We looked before at the British use of their ironclad gunboats in China to win the Opium War, the first Opium War. We're going to see mass production of rifles, the first machine guns. This is what enables the North to win part of what enables the North to win the war, the Civil War against the South in the United States. What starts to distinguish more powerful European countries from less powerful European countries. And it's going to play a big role in allowing what we see in Development 3.3, what's coming next, of of imperialism, right? Where we see Africa and Asia largely come under the rule of different European countries. Okay, that's not going to be really possible without this modernization of militaries. Okay, and because we're seeing this distinction, major distinction develop between European countries and non-European countries, or sort of white countries versus non-white countries. We want to include the United States. This has a big impact on the self-concept of European and white peoples in general. They often will come to believe that, at least their intellectuals will come to believe that they're superior to other peoples. Okay, and this is noted, for example, in some of the social Darwinist ways of thinking, right? That the fittest people survive and thrive. And you can see that in the primary source where Walter Bagehot is talking about the races that are militarily competitive are the ones who are dominant. And so that's really important. We also see that as a kind of justification too for the conquests, for European superiority and for European imperialism, as we'll see in the next development 3.3. We also see that non-Europeans notice the economic and political power and the economic and political power of America and the European powers, and so they're going to send people to study Europe and the United States. Okay, the other primary source, document 8.7 in Sources for Forging the Modern World, is going to have some writing from a Chinese person visiting the United States and reporting on it, trying to learn about it. And non-European governments, say the Ottoman Empire, China, wanted very much to learn how can we become as powerful as these European countries, so that we can resist them. Right? How are we going to resist their domination of us? And not even domination always at first, but they're getting stronger. The Ottoman Empire is losing ground. The Chinese Empire is humiliated by Britain. How do we try to figure out how to hold our own here? Okay, and so I hope that ties together the readings and helps you understand what we're looking at here, both how the previous developments influenced 3.2 and how it'll tie to the next one. Okay, please tell me how I can help you in this shift to online education, and I will be happy to think about the suggestions that you make. And please be in touch. Thank you.